The day has finally arrived where Paul George met in Philadelphia with his introductory press conference and spoke to the Philly media, breaking down what went wrong in his exit from the Los Angeles Clippers, why Philadelphia was so appealing to him, and his expectations for this season overall. We did get our first look at him in a Sixers uniform, rocking that brand new number 8, PG8 right there, with an honor to Kobe that he shouted out and went a little bit in depth in. In this video, I want to break down a little bit of what stood out specifically from this press conference, the quotes about Joel Embiid that I thought were interesting, the details that he gave about the Clippers, and everything else that he did get into. So let's get right into it. And off the bat, I want to start with this quote right here when he was directly asked about his relationship with the Clippers at this point. And when asked, he said, quote, "There's no ill will. Forever grateful for the opportunity they gave me to come back. It didn't work out. That's business. But I had to make the right decision for my family. We had a great mutual talk as it played out, and I felt there was closure on the situation. I'm happy for them. They're happy for me, and I'm a Sixer now, so that's behind me." So I do love kind of the honesty from Paul George, and honestly, as a whole, I thought he handled this press conference really well. Now, granted, with all that being said, I do understand from the Clippers fan perspective why you feel disrespected here. I do understand why you were pulling up, the receipts from the past, such as this right here. Immediately during the press conference as it's going down, a tweet does come out on NBA Central saying that Paul George says playing for the Clippers instead of the Lakers felt like he was playing for the B team. And then shout out to Omar Osman here, who tweeted that Paul George went from, quote, growing up a Clippers fan to realizing he played for the B team. Now, the reality of the situation is business, and that's exactly what Paul George alluded to in this specific answer. And the fact of the matter is, if the money was right, he would still be in Los Angeles. But the bottom line is that it was not, and it came right coming from Daryl Morey, or more really Josh Harris's pockets right here. And we are very happy that that is the case right here in Philadelphia. And we know what Paul George brings as a basketball player. We know overall what he's capable of producing. The numbers speak for themselves right there. But I did think it was really interesting, particularly when he got into what appealed about Philadelphia. And specifically when discussing that, he talked a lot about how this aligns with his current career goals, that he still has this hunger to compete, to win. Spoke about appreciating Tyrese Maxey's game from afar, and really his growing friendship with Joel Embiid that has kind of begun a couple years ago, and just the focus of the franchise, it being in win now, and that's just being where everything aligned. The money's right, the situation's right, and ultimately he made the call to come try out the East Coast. But that conversation about his relationship with Joel Embiid was particularly interesting to me. Now, when we think about Joel Embiid, he's not a guy with a large circle here. He's a pretty exclusive guy, tends to stay in his own lane, mind his business, more of a family man. But Paul George was asked about Joel Embiid, and he said, quote, "Joel has secretly been one of my closest all-star game friends. It felt kind of inevitable that at some point we would link up and be teammates." And this was a pretty surprising quote to me. And now Paul George was asked to go in a little bit more detail about this later on in the press conference. Shout out to Kyle Neubeck for the question there. And he honestly hit a really candid answer. It started with Josh Harris trying to laugh it off, saying it all started with the side eye, which we all, of course, remember on that NBA countdown there. And then Paul really gave a pretty blunt and honest answer, saying how it started just from nothing, that we would run into each other at all-star games, gradually began to build a relationship, started the conversation, how's the family, how's the kids, all these type of things, to where it evolved over time to the point where Joel hit him with a pretty serious conversation, just saying man, I really respect you as a person, as a human being, and as a friend. And it's pretty rare to have Joel had that kind of outlook about anybody, to be perfectly honest, at least what we see in the public there. And for Joel Embiid specifically, that's been something that I've been critical of him in the past, that I do think he's a guy who has not been a networker as it comes. When you think about these NBA super teams, these teams that are able to come together, it tends to originate from these types of discussions, from building a relationship, from wanting to coexist with a guy and share a floor, and ultimately that's when the ball begins to get rolling to make that actually happen. And that's exactly what Joel Embiid did in this particular situation. So shout out to him, and he will now get his true running mate to join him and add to the already impressive stats that he's obviously comparing, and they will officially put together the best big three in the NBA, with, of course, Joel Embiid with these stats, with Paul George with these stats, and, of course, Tyrese Maxey with 25.9 points and 6.2 assists per game of his own right here. Now, he was asked specifically about this trio and how he thinks he fits in. And Paul George was pretty candid, saying, I know who I am. I've played with just about everybody at this point, listing from Russell Westbrook to Kawhi Leonard to everyone else that he has shared the floor with. And he was asked, particularly with this fit, which I did think there was a relatively interesting answer there. So to dive into what he said, he started off saying that he doesn't think the positional 1-3-5 trio, which of course being Tyrese Maxey as the point guard, Paul George as the small forward, and Joel Embiid as the big man, even with the NBA as positionless seamless as it become. This is about as clean as it gets from a fit perspective when you think about building a big three. So I do love that's been one of the most appealing factors of this Paul George idea and concept of him coming to the Sixers. But he was asked how much this changes his role on the team, and he said, quote, "Ultimately, I know what I'm out there to do, and that's put the ball in the basket and try and guard the best player on the other team." So that's music to my ears as far as what I expect from Paul George and what I'm hoping for. But I did love him putting it on full display there. He did honestly have a little bit like this politician kind of feeling to him, that he was pretty suave with his responses. There was a little bit of, given what we were hoping for, but that's exactly what you should be doing in this situation. I thought he did a great job ingratiating himself to Philadelphia, taking answers head on, that he did not duck any questions or dodge anything. And particularly, I love the second part of this question as well, where Paul George was asked his thoughts on playing a place that might have a little more pressure than other spots in his career. And he mentions that he isn't shying away and is looking forward to the pressure, and says, quote, "At the end of the day, it's brotherly love," right? Which was a great quote there. He had a couple other nice little digs in there. He mentioned one where he said, if Will Smith can move from Philly to Beverly Hills, why can't I move from California to Philly? So some cool stuff like that. You can tell that he had done a little bit of homework coming in, which I definitely appreciate and I think goes over well with the fan base. But that pressure is something that I do think is a notable conversation to have. That when you think about the critiques of Paul George in the past, some of it has to do with not rising up when the moments were at its largest. So the fact that he's kind of taking this head on and making that clear that he wants that to be the case, I think is important. And while that doesn't change who he is at his core, and we will see how ultimately that ages, the bottom line is he's saying the right things, and he has his head on the right way for that particular spot. And I also think for a lot of these criticisms for Paul George, when you speak about him not living up to expectations, things change a whole lot differently when you're talking about sharing the floor with two other stars like Tyrese Maxey and like Joel Embiid here, and this not to mention a real deal supporting cast, such as guys like Caleb Martin, a notable backup center with Andre Drummond, guy like Kelly Oubre, who of course will make his impact felt there. So I feel a lot better about him in this situation than even thinking about in Los Angeles, where there were nights where he was looked at to be the number one. I think it's pretty obvious at this point in his career that Paul George was not cut to be a number one. And there was a point in his career early on in the Indiana days where he was cold-blooded. He was that dude, and he's earned a great bit of respect. It's kind of interesting to me that Paul George very clearly gets more respect from his peers than I think from NBA fans in general or media members. You can even see like a lot of the young guys coming up will mention Paul George as the guy they modeled their game after, or the guy they consider their GOAT. And while I think that's a little bit strong, I do think it's still worth noting. And obviously, their feelings are their feelings, so you can't fully take away from that. But just something that is a little bit of food for thought there. But the bottom line is he looks like he is prepared for the pressure cooker, which is incredibly important to be. Now, another factor that went into this is, of course, the Nick Nurse factor. That he's never played for Nick Nurse before, a guy who has a ton of respect around NBA circles, but he does have a teammate that has in Kawhi Leonard. And he was asked about Nick Nurse and said, quote, "I see how hard this team plays for him, and they respect him, and the respect the players have for him goes a long way. I was a teammate of Kawhi's, and Kawhi spoke highly of him. When Kawhi speaks, you listen. I've learned that. I have the utmost respect for Coach Nurse, and I'm looking forward to being coached." Again, just an answer that I really like how it came out there, that he's saying all the right things, and that's the best way to, put your foot start off on the right foot with Sixers fans and Sixers media here. And I do think the pressure is going to be a little different. There have absolutely been the playoff P moments and when he has not shown up. But again, I think that's a little bit more minimized. And the fact, if you want to look at this completely glass empty here, he is so many miles better as a basketball player than Tobias Harris. I cannot exaggerate that anymore. And I don't want to set the bar on the floor as they're paying this guy a real deal max contract, not the Suedo max that Tobias Harris ultimately was on for that. We're talking $180 million for 5 years versus $212 million for 4 years for Paul George. So about a $12 million difference per year. But the bottom line is the production is the production, and we will see how he ultimately produces there. So for Paul George overall, I'm pretty thrilled for how the start to his Philadelphia tenure is. It was nice to see him sit down, take center stage, and even beyond this, there's a lot of cool clips originating. Stuff like him talking to season ticket holders, him kind of speaking with the team, walking through, saying 8 is great in the uniform and stuff like that. He just seems to be approaching it with the right mindset, and that's all we can hope for at this point in time. Now, granted, is all of this mean nothing when at the end of the day when they actually start playing basketball? It's all about how he performs on the court, for sure. There's no doubt about that. But the bottom line is you still have to go through this process, and this guy does seem to be ready to take it on the chin and do exactly what is asked from him from start to finish. So we should have some high hopes for this Sixers team this year, and Paul George is a large reason why. So these stats that we've talked about so heavily here, and a guy who is a real deal 22.6 point per game scorer, a guy that is going to be a perfect third option, that is that perfect basketball fit next to Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid, linking them together as that true wing, a guy that can look the Jason Tatums and Mikal Bridges in the eye as they go against his Eastern Conference foes. The Sixers are in their best spot and best position to win than they've been in quite some time. This is by far the most talented Sixers team of my lifetime. It certainly is of the Joel Embiid era, and that's even speaking about that 2001 Finals team, which Allen Iverson had to backpack his way there. So we'll see how things shake out when they actually take the court. Still a lot to uncover about this Sixers team, and still a lot of news to break down in the offseason. As things currently stand, there is still one open roster spot, and both Daryl Morey and Josh Harris were still very open about keeping the flexibility moving into the season. That everything has been focused about keeping the optimal flexibility for this offseason, but it could not be clearer that we are now in the all-in moment. So during the season, don't expect them to sit on their hands and just deal with how this team looks. They're still going to be working to improve, and that is a great sign for the Sixers team. So still a lot to get into, but it is exciting times in the world of the Sixers and exciting times for us right here on Sixers Digest. So if you have not already, make sure you are smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video, any comments you have below. I cannot wait to dive into whatever happens next with the Sixers team, and I'll be with you from start to finish right here on Sixers Digest. So talk to you next time, and make sure you're smashing that subscribe. Peace.